Good afternoon. My name is Michelle Anderson. I am pleased to have the opportunity to provide comments to the committee. I am a tribal member of the Native Village of Gulkana, an Ahtna shareholder and president of Ahtna Incorporated. Ahtna is the smallest Alaska regional corporation established under ANCSA in 1971 and represents the interests of over 1,900 Ahtna Athabascan shareholders. The Ahtna region encompasses 8 villages and holds title to 1.6 million acres of land in south central Alaska. All of our villages are connected by the road system. Raised in the Ahtna region, I am deeply committed to protecting my culture and our way of life, responsible land development, and securing economic benefits for those I serve. I believe that these goals can coexist. Ahtna's lands extend from the Denali Preserve to Chitna. They surround North America's tallest peak, Mount Denali, to America's largest national park, Wrangell-St. Elias. Ahtna has 622,000 acres of land in the Wrangell-St. Elias National Park and Preserve, lands that our elders selected prior to the creation of the park. Ahtna is now one of the largest inholders of private property of public lands in the United States. Our lands are of paramount importance to the Ahtna people who have lived here for thousands of years and depend on hunting, fishing, and other resources to sustain our way of life. Ahtna's leaders made it possible for the Trans-Alaska Pipeline System to be constructed from 1974 to 1977. A 55-mile corridor through Ahtna's fee simple lands was set aside for the 48-inch diameter pipeline. TAPS, Pump Station 11, and the Glen Allen Response Base were built near my family's home. TAPS has transported approximately 17 billion barrels of oil through our lands in a safe and environmentally sound manner. My family, like so many others, directly benefited from TAPS as both my parents worked on the pipeline. In fact, my father still works on TAPS today for Alaska Pipeline Service Company. Ahtna shareholders and many other Alaska regional and village corporations have benefited from TAPS with employment, contracting, and training opportunities. In 2015, 39% of Ahtna employees on TAPS were Alaska Native. These are highly prized jobs and a great work environment. Ahtna's concern is that TAPS is operating at approximately 25% of its capacity. The state of Alaska with Prudhoe Bay and Park have opened up their lands for safe and responsible resource development. Alaska Native corporations like ASRC and Kupik Corporation made Alpine possible. ASRC shares 70% of the profits derived from Alpine with other regional corporations as a provision of 7I of ANCSA. Alaskans finally got our first North Slope oil from the federally owned NPRA with CD5 in late 2015. ConocoPhillips and its predecessor companies have tried for a very long period of time to develop oil. Senator Murkowski has been a vocal advocate of cleaning up NPRA from damages inflicted by the federal government over the last 60+ years, and it's finally happening. It takes years, even decades, to drill just one exploratory well when the federal government is involved in the process. Our TAPS pipeline needs a lot more oil, which needs to come from federal lands. Speaking as the mother of 2 sons in college, they will need work opportunities to remain living in Alaska. The federal government owns over 60% of Alaska's 365 million acres of land. Ahtna has proven that a major world-class pipeline like TAPS can safely transport through our own lands. TAPS just needs more oil, particularly from federal lands, to keep running for future generations. In August 2015, I had the pleasure of meeting with President Obama along with other Alaska Native leaders. I stressed to the President the importance of the Alaska LNG for Ahtna and for all Alaskans. Approximately 35 miles of the proposed Alaska LNG pipeline would flow underneath our beautiful Ahtna land. The Ahtna people will require this project to be constructed to the highest worldwide standards, including materials and personnel. We are confident that the state of Alaska and its industry partners will be able to deliver. For the benefit of Ahtna shareholders and all Alaskans, we need the federal government to open up their lands in a timely manner. This must include efficient land leases, permitting, and a collaborative relationship with the state of Alaska and industry for both oil and gas and mining. Ahtna owns some of the most pristine lands in the world, and we have proven that development can occur safely and to the economic benefit of all Alaskans. The vast majority of Alaska's federally owned resource-rich lands are seldom, if ever, seen by Alaskans. In 1971, 45 years ago, ANCSA was passed. Ahtna was to receive title to land of 1.77 million acres. All these years later, we are still waiting for 250,000 acres to complete our land settlement. Alaskans are frustrated that the federal government does not move very fast when Alaska acreage is part of the equation. We need the federal government to take a proactive approach with their vast acreage to provide economic benefits for Ahtna and all Alaskans. Several Alaska regional corporations, including Doyon and Ahtna, are attempting to develop our own lands for oil and gas development. We need major oil and gas and mining companies to continue making multi-billion-dollar investments in Alaska to keep taps running for the next 40 years, to protect our Ahtna culture, and to provide economic benefits to our shareholders. On behalf of all the Ahtna people, I sincerely appreciated the opportunity to speak today. Chenan.
Thank you, Michelle. Admiral Barrett, welcome to the committee.
Chairman Mikowski, thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I'm particularly delighted to have this opportunity at the Pipeline Safety Training Center. LESCA has been proud to be a part of supporting this organization since startup, and they have helped train many of the high-skilled, very smart, very tough workers that our company, our industry, and actually the state depends on. So I want to thank them for that also. They've been a huge basis of our success. So in terms of opportunity, TAPS, Trans-Alaska Pipeline System, is fundamentally sound infrastructure, although it's a little old, but it's fundamentally sound. We have an extremely strong workforce, and we're operating well under capacity. This morning I saw a note from Clint Van Winkeren. He's our oil movements engineering director. He was up at Pump Station 1 on Friday, and we ran a successful full load test on new pumps that we've installed up there, new booster pumps. That's part of our renewal process on the system. And so we ran them up to a full load and proved it was running fine. That's 1.09 million barrel flow rate. Today, one of the best days we've had this winter on the pipeline, and our numbers are higher in the winter than in the summer, we were at 556,000 barrels. So without any change, without any strain, without any lift, we could take in up to 1.9 million barrels if it was available to us today. The low flow, as you know, and I've talked before, it creates many challenges with water and wax and just the flow rate. It's kind of like your car. It's designed, TAPS is, to run very efficiently. Your vehicle is at 55, 60 miles an hour down the highway. If you ran it all the time at 15 or 20 miles an hour, you get soot build up, your spark plugs clog, pretty soon you get backfires. You need to maintain the car much more aggressively, and that's kind of TAPS. We're running well below the space that we were designed to run in. We're confident we can handle that. We've got a great workforce, and we're constantly renewing, but it is costly, it's increasingly complex, and it's difficult for us to do. We do know, and our workforce knows, both our own employees and our contractors, that we need to operate safely, and we do. Last year was the safest year ever in TAPS history. We had near perfect reliability. We had an extremely strong environmental record. And as you look around at some of the recognition our people have gotten, we received the API Large Pipeline Operator Award for Environmental Performance. We received the Governor's Safety Award. For the 5th year in a row, we were selected as one of the world's most ethical companies. And we received our Vessel of Opportunity program in Prince William Sound, received an Ocean Stewardship Award from the Alaska Sea Life Center. My point to you, though, that the backbone of our organization is not simply infrastructure, it's our people, both blue-collar and white-collar workforces. We're over 90% Alaska-based. 70%, by the way, our partnerships with our contractors are Alaska-based companies. But we're 20% Alaska Native. We're over 30% women. We're over 33% minority. And our key partners include companies like Doyon and ARSC and Ahtna and Chugach and NANA. We're very proud of that. And our people, in many cases, are the backbones in their communities. So the benefit that comes is not just the jobs, but the people that come with those jobs, the families that come with those jobs, and what they contribute to their communities, whether it's food banks, United Way, coaching sport teams, being active in churches. They are the backbone of many Alaska communities. We're very proud of that. They're very generous with their time, their leadership, and their energy. So the key to our the key to our sustainability is throughput. I heard a statement, up in Fairbanks here, you had a big week last week with the Arctic Council meetings. I heard Elsie Brett Eklund, the Norwegian ambassador to the Arctic Council, speak 2 weeks ago in Anchorage. And she said Norway supports more oil development in the Barents Sea. And this is a senior Norwegian official, recognizing the risks. And she said the reason they do that is because they understand that what comes with that development is foundational to the health and well-being of their communities. And Norway has the highest percentage of any circumpolar nation actually living above the Arctic Circle. So I think that's the opportunity that to both sustain and create more opportunities for that. Senator, you've mentioned many times before we need better access, we need an improved regulatory environment, and if we get that, I think we can safely deliver oil that benefits U.S. national security, the state of Alaska broadly, and many thousands of people who work on, support, and benefit from our activities. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom. Mr. Glenn, welcome. Escaped from the volcano. Barrow is closed down because of the volcano.
Yeah, if you're headed to Bethel or Nome or Kotzebue or Barrow, you shouldn't be flying today. The airlines have closed down the west half and north portion of our state. Thank you, Senator, for inviting me to this hearing. My name is Richard Glenn. I'm Vice President of Lands Natural Resources for Arctic Slope Regional Corporation. And I am grateful to be on this panel today. And I was excited to learn about Atna's history. And I hope that in my brief testimony you get a little bit of a picture of the Arctic Slope region as well and our views on these important issues. There's 4 key points that I'd like to present today, and my written testimony will go into greater detail. These points focus mostly on the challenges and barriers to responsible oil and gas development, mineral development in Alaska. We are an oil and gas dependent state, and resources extracted from our region are the main artery of Alaska's economy. Over the years, we've faced significant challenges, and my written comments goes into details, chapter and verse on those challenges. But the 4 broad points I'd like to take a look at is, first of all, look at the balance of development with respect to communities, Arctic communities. Today's debate seems to sway from absolute, complete, enveloping protection and stay there, rather than this balance of responsible development and protecting the environment, safe development. Rather than mothballing Arctic resources at the detriment of local communities, consider how tribal and native communities are empowered by development and whether the risk has already been mitigated in the plan for development. Our local leadership works to provide controls on development in our region so that the mitigation is already there when the development proceeds. This preserves the environment, this allows for a local economy, and allows our local subsistence activities to put food on our tables. The local perspective should not be overlooked, dismissed, or marginalized as the federal government develops resources in the Arctic. Second, I would urge that the federal government resist the permanent setting aside of large swaths of land and ocean in the name of, for example, species protection. The Arctic is home to these huge migrations of animals that they go from east to west, north to south, and they go in and out of the frame of the picture for any small, special set-aside patch of land or ocean. It's the migration and the seasonality of ice cover and open water is so big that it renders these small parcels almost meaningless. The polar bear critical habitat designation, for example, which is about as big as the state of California, is probably the most well-known example of this, but there are many others. And there's potentially going to exist many more. But our experience, both onshore and offshore, is that setting aside of huge swaths of land often has unintended negative impacts. Third, I would like to thank the administration for embracing green and renewable energy. There can be an appropriate mix of extractive industry and green energy, but green energy, for example, in rural Alaska is not a replacement for commercial development. Also, it's not even a replacement for the diesel fuel, for example, in our region, that's the lifeblood of the smallest villages. But all you have to do is travel just up the hill here to the Cold Climate Housing Research Center and look at some marvelous successes in solar power and energy conservation. But we embrace this technology, but we recognize it for what it is. Finally, we have issues with respect to the several agencies within the federal government on education. It's difficult to educate them about Alaska Native issues. I think that in this administration we've made great progress on tribal consultation, but there still needs to be an awareness of this kind of braided rope relationship that we have, especially in my region, between tribes, municipalities, and the ANCSA corporations. ANCSA land ownership, resource ownership benefits tribal members. And so, although we're three different animals, we represent the same constituency, and we are braided together like strands of a rope. The administration appears not to understand the value of resource development to municipalities and tribal members. These are our shareholders. We were created by Congress and are the largest private landowners in this state, yet our ownership is sometimes disregarded or it's discounted as if our charge is irrelevant to the contribution to the quality of life for the people who we serve. Senator Murkowski and other committee members, as you look to development and national energy policy, please remember that Alaska is an asset for domestic energy production. It's also our home. ASRC appreciates all of your efforts to pursue federal legislation that would address obstacles to sustainable oil and gas development. We also appreciate your steadfast commitment to the challenging issues before us in federal management, land management, regulations, and policies. These have left an uncertainty for developers in this state. ASRC is poised to assist you as you look for proper solutions for these issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Appreciate it. And last member on the panel is Mr. Joe Maroshak. Welcome.
Thank you, Senator. In the interest of time, I'm going to start about halfway through my written testimony with focus on the federal permitting challenges. Exploration and development in the Arctic, and in particular in Alaska, has its own special set of requirements. Because of the nature of the land, the tundra, the exploration wells drilled outside of existing infrastructure are drilled in winter using ice roads and ice pads when the tundra is frozen. The ice-based infrastructure melts in the summer and leaves no marks. However, this reduces the amount of time available to drill to about 3 months of the year. When it comes to developing an exploration discovery, the desire to minimize the development footprint requires that we use processes from central production facilities. It requires that we drill wells from central pads using expensive, extended reach drilling. All this leads to costly development and longer time frames for exploration and development for land based outside of the Arctic than it would be for land based outside the Arctic. There are a number of challenging regulatory issues we continue to have with development on federal lands, and I'll summarize several of these. In order for development, conservation, and impact mitigation to proceed orderly in the NPRA, agency decisions must be predictable and reasonably durable. Predictability is essential for developers, residents, investors, the state of Alaska, North Slope Borough, Alaska Native Corps, the tribes, and the villages on the North Slope. Since we first began exploring in the NPRA in 2000, we've seen steadily increasing and evolving requirements from the federal government. At this juncture in time, we have over 250 federal requirements for new developments that must be addressed in NPRA. Again, time prevents me from reading this list to you, but I've included it in an amendment. In an attachment, rather. The steady increase in standards and mitigation measures is complicated by the agencies revisiting previous work, decisions, and compromises. For example, an environmental impact statement that was performed in 2004 that explicitly evaluated and approved roads proposed for the planned development of CD5, GMT1, Moose's Tooth 1, Moose's Tooth 2. However, as permitting for each of these projects has proceeded, we've faced additional requirements that were not part of the original project scope, adding time to the schedule, increasing costs, and creating uncertainty regarding the viability of development. It is our belief that the current standards and mitigation measures that we follow in NPRA more than adequately address concerns like potential impacts to the environment and subsistence hunting. We recognize the legitimacy of those concerns, but we feel that they have been well considered and properly addressed. One federal issue that threatens even more uncertainty is the November 2015 White House memorandum calling for the Departments of Defense, Interior, and Agriculture, the Environmental Protection Agency, and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and all the bureaus and agencies within them, for example, Bureau of Land Management, Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement, National Park Service, National Marine Fisheries, and Fish and Wildlife Services, to develop new impact avoidance and mitigation standards in each of the agency's areas of jurisdiction. This new policy has the potential to upset the balance of protection and development that Congress has directed in the laws under which the agencies operate. From what we have been able to discern, the basis for estimating impacts and associated mitigation measures are not well defined, not predictable, and do not allow us to estimate the effect they may have on the overall economics of oil and gas development. As the agencies provide detail around their plans, assuming there is a public process, we will be submitting comments regarding their concerns. In closing, ConocoPhillips, through its heritage companies Arco Alaska, Phillips Petroleum, and Conoco, has been an active explorer and developer on both federal and state lands in Alaska, both onshore and offshore, from Cook Inlet to the North Slope for over 50 years. We have a track record of environmental and social responsibility operations. Through our investments and those of our other oil and gas companies, we've generated jobs for Alaskans and created wealth for the state of Alaska, Alaska communities, Native regional village corporations, and their shareholders. While we're still very active on state lands, federal lands represent new opportunities to continue supporting the Alaska economy. It's our intent to work with the federal government, residents of the slope, the state of Alaska, and other stakeholders to address concerns such that there is a reasonable regulatory framework guiding oil and gas development on the North Slope lands. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you all for your testimony. Let me ask probably a more general question to each of you to begin the conversation. And Richard, you used the words, Alaska is an asset, Alaska is our home. And when we think about Alaska as the place that we live and work and raise our families, it is important to recognize that we have considerable assets associated with the land, and it's how we access those assets and do so in a way that provides for jobs, provides for a sustainable economy, but also accesses them in a way that ensures that we're good environmental stewards for the land. We want to raise our families in a place as beautiful as your family has lived for generations and generations and generations, and we want to be able to do so going into the future. So from a broader perspective, given the testimony that you each have presented here today, what more can we be doing, should we be doing, to ensure that Alaskans are able to achieve their fullest potential with the resources that we have available to us in our state? Now, Joe, you have mentioned that from Conoco's perspective, regulations hold us back. I think you have suggested, Michelle, that access is a consideration. Can you each, and I don't care who starts off the conversation, but can you each speak to the areas that you feel that Alaskans' potential in accessing our resources is being held back in some way by the federal government so that we can know better how to help facilitate that? I'll throw that out to whoever would like to begin.
I'll give it a shot.
Okay.
I think there's two areas that your question leads me is has to do with land ownership and federal leasing of federal lands, both in the on and offshore, the terms of leasing, and also the price of delay of even an unapproved project. If it takes multiple years to start from exploration to production, there's a price associated with that. So let's start with that one first. And as you know, in Alaska, most of the resource wealth has been produced from state-owned lands, but there is some, and Michelle alluded to it, there is some production now coming from native-owned lands. And then there's native-owned lands now finally being developed in the National Petroleum Reserve. My point is, if the resource development is of value to native people, and then that project is delayed over multiple years, that represents a real financial impact to native people. We've distributed from the portion of production that is owned by Alaska's native people from the alpine and satellite fields, we've distributed more than $1 billion to all of the regional corporations throughout the state. And yet, if there's some portion of our resource wealth that's made unavailable to us over a period of years, that has a real measurable financial impact to all of Alaska's native regional corporations. So that's the first one, is that there's a cost associated with delay. The second one is that the terms for leasing might be reconsidered. The federal leasing terms should consider a revamp that somehow protects the terms of the leases during this lengthy exploration to production phase. Given our setting, it's remote, it's Arctic, it's sensitive, there's all kinds of reasons for why it should take a measurable and well thought out process from exploration to development. My point is get rid of the excessive delay and reconsider the terms for federal leasing that somehow takes into account the multi-year phases. It must go even at its most efficient pace from exploration to production.
Thank you. Joe?
Sure.
Mhm.
Sure. Thank you. So I picked up on a point when you asked your question, Senator. It's not the regulations that are so problematic. It's the interpretation and the unpredictability of how those regulations are going to be interpreted sometimes. We believe that the regulatory agencies should be following their statutory mandates, not only to protect the environment and subsistence, but also provide a reasonable and balanced path to ensure transparency and predictability in those regulations, and to avoid overlap among the agencies regarding lands that are leased for oil and gas development. And as Richard mentioned, one of the things that we think makes some sense as well is for areas that have been taken off limits, for that to be reconsidered. We think that there are some good opportunities for exploration and development. It's kind of amazing that I think that the native corporations and the people on the north and the people developing these resources can come to an agreement on how they ought to be developed, but we're precluded by doing that by some of the federal mandates.
Others?
Senator, a couple of thoughts. I've sat specifically on regulations. I've been on both sides of this fence, both with the Coast Guard, with Pipeline Safety Agency, USDOT, and now with a pipeline operator. I think fundamentally, some of my background, Coast Guard, 35 years ago, it's a different philosophy or approach to regulating an industry to a certain extent. It's complex, you can't dumb it down. But always in the Coast Guard, the goal was never to stop ships from sailing. The goal isn't to tie up the ships. The goal is to have them sail safely, because there's an acknowledgement and a recognition that maritime commerce is important to the economy, the health, the security, and the well-being of this nation. And I don't see that relative to the oil and gas. I think a much more collaborative relationship between the agencies that implement statutes and write regulations, a less prescriptive one, but fundamentally collaborative. I feel strongly some of our best ideas and works, we've got 800 employees, another 600 baseline contractors, thousands of other. They show up every day trying to do a good job at what they do. We're not the enemy of anybody. And I think working with us and with companies is somehow perceived as a conflict. It's very much a command and control regime. It's, can we find you doing something wrong? In the long term, I think that gets you less safety, less reliable performance, more environmental risk, than just an upfront, open, collaborative approach to what a regulation might mean to track where Joe is going, and then follow it. I just think I don't see that nearly. So I think that's an opportunity to shape the regulatory regimes in that direction.
Good, thank you. Michelle, anything to add?
Just real briefly, you know, development in our area, just like it is anywhere else, in terms of the federal delays or barriers that you were asking about, it's very hard, it's very challenging to work with individuals or people who are interpreting regulations who've never even been to our area, who don't understand the lay of the land, if you will. So we do a lot of education of these individuals and agencies when they've already scoped out a project or an area, and then coming back to us, the people that live there, and trying to make their project fit where we are at. So just more involvement of local people, landowners from the beginning versus bringing us in at the end, I think would be helpful.
Well, that kind of ties into a follow-on question that I wanted to ask, and this is how we as Alaskans, again, who are choosing to live and work and raise our families here, how we convey to the rest of the country and often to the rest of the world that what we seek to do here is, again, to develop our state's resources and assets, but that we do so with an eye towards the stewardship. And we oftentimes don't get very much credit for the fact that we do have the kind of safety record that you have cited to Admiral Barrett, that we do have a level of care for production up on the North Slope, for instance, the likes of which you do not see anywhere else in the world in terms of the standards that are adhered to. And the question that I would ask, and I'll direct it initially both to you, Richard, and to you, Michelle, is how we kind of keep our minds straight on development and environmental protection. And I'll take you to a quote that the President made when he was up in the state in September. Governor Walker had been urging that he look to expand access for oil and gas development. And the President said, and I'm quoting him here, "One of the ironies when you're up in Alaska, and I mean this sincerely, it shows you that everybody can be two minds about this. I'd have some people say in the same breath, protect this beauty and scenic areas and make sure that nobody is polluting it. And then, oh, and by the way, let's get going on some oil drilling at the same time." I am one of those people that I guess am in the ironic category, because I do support new access and I do support new development, and I don't see the conflict in our ability to protect our lands and to make it available not only for this generation but generations going forward. How do we do a better job? Michelle, you mentioned education. Richard, you have been in the perhaps not so enviable position of being invited back to Washington, D.C. on numerous occasions to come testify. How can we do more? How can we convey the message that it is not ironic, that we want to help our people, and at the same time we can care for our lands?
Yeah, welcome to our world, right? So the issue at home is stark. I mean, we ask ourselves, who's going to, our grandchildren, what kind of school will they go to? Will there be reliable power in their communities? How will we fund the road maintenance, even snow blowing and ambulance service? Things that the rest of the world takes for granted are present in each of our communities only because of the presence of development in our region. And so we are open about it. We depend on continued development for the survival of our communities. And it's great that we have the ability to hunt, in our region, but we don't have a home to come home to if we don't also have development in our region. And so the message or the task becomes, how do you convince the world that there's something between absolute protection, like putting a jar over something and never letting anything in it, and allowing people to live. And the pristineness mystique of the Arctic will rub off on you and go away pretty fast when you're in survival mode, or when your community's in a survival mode. And the way we've been able to do it at home, I think, is to create alignment. That is, we've invested in development in our region as an owner, a landowner and an equity owner. That way, when there's success for the explorer, there's success for our community's residents. And if we were just victims of development, that's the opposite of the spectrum, the opposite end of it, where we have no ownership, no participation, and we're just victims of negative impacts. We looked at that and decided that the way to create success in our region is to create alignment. The way to create alignment is by investing in the only industry that's been around in our region long enough to pay taxes. We have a bus that fills itself with tourists this time of year. They leave Alaska Airlines, they get on a bus, they drive around the town, they leave the bus, they go in the hotel, they go back in the bus, and then they leave. And it's almost full every day, and we have 3 flights of the jet every day, and yet even that industry can barely supply its own needs as far as tax base. So we recognized our dependence on the oil and gas industry in our region, and we created alignment by investing in it, and we think that that is the answer to this we-they syndrome between sitting on the inside and sitting on the outside. We're blessed in our region that it's big. There's room for everything. There's room for everybody. If you look at a map of the North Slope and you look at the infrastructure of oil and gas pipelines, it depends on the width of the ink that they use to draw the map. But you get the impression that there's a spider web full of pipelines. If instead you get dropped off in the middle of nowhere on Alaska's North Slope, you're going to find out that there's a lot of open space, and you'll be thankful for that infrastructure when you do eventually come across it. So there's a lot of room in our region.
Thank you. Michelle?
Thank you for asking. It gives me an opportunity to share Atna's vision, which is our culture unites us, our land sustains us, our people are prosperous. Our people highly prize our land and our food resources, so we're extremely protective over both. We would never jeopardize or compromise the future of our people by standing for irresponsible land development. Our people are born there, they're buried there, that's our home. We would take care of it to the very best of our abilities and protect it. We also, you know, that second line of the vision statement, our land sustains us. While it feeds us and provides us homes, we also believe that our elders selected those lands to take care of us. We are resource rich, and we are very interested in not only developing those resources, but giving our people long-term jobs and careers at home so they don't have to leave the area to work in Anchorage or Fairbanks or wherever. You know, our lands were selected for a reason, and we take very good care of them.
Admiral Barrett, you mentioned that we are at 556,000 barrels of oil moving down the pipeline at this moment. The additional room or capacity is 1.9 million more per day that we could see. If we were to that full capacity in TAPS, what would that mean in terms of additional jobs for Alaskans, and exactly what type of jobs?
Sure. So what it would mean for Alaskans to start with is you'd have to have the development to fill us up, right? So that's thousands of jobs on the exploration and development and all the work that goes with it. But the types of jobs we have in this industry are generally high-tech. We've been strong supporters of Alaska Native Science and Engineering Program since its start, as have some of the other people at this table, ANSEP. We need a high-quality, high-talent workforce. It's engineering-heavy in the white collar, but it's every skill set. It's accounting, and it's finance, and it's engineering. We are almost 40% blue collar, right? So this is backbone American jobs, but they're instrument techs, they're mechanical techs, they're electricians, they're electrical techs. They are skilled jobs, and they pay good salaries, and they allow people to make a good living. But fundamentally, they're skilled jobs, skilled labor. And the people up here that we have working for us and the people that train them do a fabulous job, and they're very, very good at what they do. But it's a skill set, whether it's blue collar or white collar, and it's all across the board, Senator.
I've got one, let me just ask one more to you, Mr. Maruchak, and then I think we'll move to the next panel. And your testimony has spoken primarily to Conoco's activities there within NPRA, GMT1 and 2, but Conoco is also a leaseholder in our Outer Continental Shelf areas. Have you given much thought to a better leasing and regulatory system that could be implemented in frontier areas in our OCS?
Well, Senator, yes, one thing that has to happen is you have to have lease sales on a fairly regular basis. The last one was 2007. The next one is 2020. It's extraordinarily difficult to do oil and gas development, and when you have 13 years in between those areas, and when so many of the best prospective opportunities are taken off the table. But I'd like to just come back also on that to answer your question on how we can develop these areas responsibly. Having worked all over the world, I can tell you that industry's ability to protect its license to operate is based on safety and environmental performance. And in Alaska, we are absolutely, I'm very pleased with the amount of safety and environmental performance that we focus on. And then the other thing is our relationship with the native corporations and the people, the owners of the slope. All over the world, this is very, very unique. And so to come back to your question again then, if we can do it in an environmentally and safe process, and if we have the support of the local landowners and the people that live up there, it feels to me like we ought to have opportunities to develop and expand this opportunity on a much more regular basis.
Very good. Last chance, final word from any of the four on the panel.
So could I tell you how
Yes.
much we're operating on what NPRA? NPRA is about the size of the state of Indiana. Our developments on CD5, Moose's Tooth 1, Moose's Tooth 2, or 185 acres, 0.0008% of the acreage up there is what we're trying to develop right now.
0.0008% of the NPRA.
185 acres over roughly 24 million acres.
Puts it in context. Admiral Barrett?
You mentioned, too, about how people can understand that we're able to reconcile these apparently competing interests. I would just ask people to look at our record. I mean, I've been up and down the pipeline now for 5 years. I've seen brown and black bear, caribou, moose, fox, wolves, squirrels, birds. The caribou herd in our region is 4 to 5 times larger than it was before we started development. I think it's our folks are instinctively conservationists. We pay a lot of attention to it, but they value the environment we're in more than anybody else, and they live in it. And I think if you actually look at the record of the pipeline and the development on the slope, the record stands very strong, yet it's largely ignored.
Appreciate that. Michelle?
Thank you, Senator. I guess my last comments on the subject is, come visit us in January, and that's for anyone that feels like they should have a say in terms of what development occurs in our region, or for the agencies that create the regulations that we have to follow. Look at our fuel bills. Look at how our people have to make choices, and I'm not just talking about Otna people, I'm talking about people that live in the communities all along the road system. We are not Anchorage, we are not Fairbanks, or some of the larger communities where there are stores and choice and jobs. We're there because we want to be there. That's our home. We want jobs. We want resource development. We want to be able to raise our families there. We don't want any more schools closing. So I would urge people that, before you make a decision for other people, come and live in their situation for a little while and see what it's really like. We find it beautiful, and I think it would be an absolute tragedy for the state if we were to force people to leave their homes to go to bigger cities in order to survive. Rural Alaska is beautiful, and it will continue to remain so long as its people are there.
Well put. Well put.